Am I cheating or are you just doing it wrong?
Welcome to a very special episode of AvTalk, our first live Video X episode. A special one because we released a clip show earlier today. We weren't going to have a new episode because of our podcast editors, but there was a lot of snow in New York and the rest of the East Coast, so we figured that we would jump in and talk a little bit about what happened yesterday, how it affected the airlines, and how they're recovering today. I am here joined, as always, with Jason Rabinowitz.
In video. Wow.
And a special guest star, Seth Miller. Seth, thanks so much for joining us. Jason, I'm glad you could almost make your bed.
Almost. I mean, I did laundry today, and it's mostly made. It's as made as it's ever going to be.
Yeah. Well, for those that don't know, Jason's bed is had its own 15 minutes of fame on The Daily Show a little while back. So it's progress.
Yes, but now we're here in video because I pestered Ian for the good chunk of a week about tinkering with some sort of live thing because I didn't want to wait another 2 weeks to do an episode because then we'd forget about all the stuff that happened this time.
Exactly. So let's talk about what happened yesterday, which was a whole lot of snow, fierce winds, freezing fog, all sorts of good stuff. Socked in New York, Boston, Philadelphia to a lesser extent, and sent some planes to a very random assortment of airports.
Diversions galore, I think, would be a good way to describe
it. Dozens and dozens of diversions. I think the one that got the most news was Singapore's SQ-26, the A380, ended up in Newburgh.
Not the first time they've been to Newburgh either.
No, not the first time. I think that, every time this happens, I think people forget that it's happened before. And then, they just go from there. But that one, I think, made the most news. O'Hare ended up with, I want to say, almost a dozen aircraft from a bunch of different airlines. Dulles looked like a parking lot for international
Dulles
flights.
closed a runway to start parking aircraft on, actually.
It came close to that at O'Hare, too. They parked them at the hard stands, and then they moved them over to an unused taxiway. So it escalated pretty quickly.
Yeah,
I think I read at one point Philadelphia actually declared itself full and stopped taking diversions.
A few airports declared full.
Toronto did too.
Toronto, Baltimore did. Yeah,
I know the Singapore flight, the SQ-26, was originally destined for Montreal at one point.
Okay.
And then decided to undivert and redivert, I'm not sure, but ended up in Newburgh. So it made sense at the time if you believed the we're going to reopen JFK in a couple hours, don't worry about it theory.
Yeah.
And Albany actually got a 787 from Norwegian. They ended up slightly more screwed, I think, than the Singapore folks.
Yeah, so let me set the stage a little bit for what exactly happened and why this was so astronomically bad yesterday. So we had a pretty historic nor'easter hit pretty much all of the Northeast Wednesday night into Thursday morning. And in New York, it wasn't forecast to be all that bad, something like 5 to 8 inches of snow. And really not all that out of the ordinary for a snowstorm in New York. But as the day had gone on, they had actually started to issue blizzard warnings because the snow wasn't so bad, but the wind had really picked up. And with JFK right on Jamaica Bay, right on the water, anytime they plow, all the wind just kind of blows the snow right back onto the runway. So they just cannot keep up with it no matter how much they plow the runway. So initially they said, okay, we're going to close the airport entirely and we're going to open up at 1 o'clock this afternoon. And then 1 o'clock became 3 o'clock. And that was kind of the reopening time for a while. And every airline from seemingly everywhere in the world said, okay, we're going to launch our flights from Europe, Asia, from the West Coast. And by the time they get to JFK, it'll be past 3 o'clock, the airport will be open, and everyone will be able to happily land. But that didn't happen, and 6 p.m. became 7 a.m. the next morning. So we ended up having dozens and dozens and dozens of aircraft from all over the world coming into an airport that was not going to be open for another 12 hours.
We had a brief 8 p.m. window at one point also, I feel like. But yeah, it was ridiculous.
At one point, JFK, the airport itself tweeted out, we're going to reopen this evening. And I looked at the FAA website, and the FAA website said, we're going to reopen, JFK is going to reopen at 7 a.m., to which the FAA actually tweeted back at me and said, no, it's actually 8 p.m., which I replied, no, your own website says 7 a.m. the next day. So even the FAA at one point yesterday evening had no idea what was going on. It was that bad.
Let's just assume that different people are actually running air traffic control than the Twitter accounts, and we're all.
They sent me a screenshot of their own site that had the I guess the out of date information that was updated at the moment they had told me I was wrong. So
Awesome.
it was kind of outstanding that literally the federal government, the people in charge of telling you when things are open, did not know when things were going to open.
So let's talk about a little bit about what happened because of the closed airports. I mean, the real impact to a lot of flights. I mean, Boston got a lot of snow, but they had canceled pretty much 100% of their flights.
And Boston's
beforehand.
usually JFK's main relief valve. Anything that doesn't make it JFK, for the most part, ends up at Boston.
Right. And so that didn't happen this time. And so you had flights that were coming from Europe and Asia ending up in Chicago, Detroit, Montreal, Toronto. One in Albany, like we talked about, one in Newburgh.
Pittsburgh.
A couple of Delta flights went to Atlanta.
Every Lufthansa flight headed for JFK went all the way to Atlanta.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of things happened where you've got literally thousands of people in the wrong place. So let's talk about a little about what happens when that happens.
Well, for starters, you sit on the plane for a few hours waiting to see if they've got a pair of stairs or a bus or something or a gate where they can actually get you off the plane, right? In Newburgh, Singapore Airlines, the passengers took them about 4 hours. They tried to move the plane in, like with the taxi gear, the tow gear, and couldn't. And eventually they pulled stairs up and everybody boarded, came down the stairs in the blowing snow, only from the first level, obviously, and eventually was able to get on buses, go into the terminal and clear immigration. But they probably had it the worst of anyone in that sense. But, it's a tough situation with, even once you finally get off the plane, then what do you do? Right? I mean, for the people near New York, and I want to say Dulles, Albany, and Newburgh, Stewart, they were able to get buses for a lot of their passengers. The Norwegian 787 that ended up in Albany, they had buses. Stewart had a bunch of buses to carry people down. Emirates 201 that was supposed to go to JFK and ended up in Dulles, they ended up with buses. But when you're further afield, it's way harder. So one of the, I want to say it's China Southern diverted maybe to O'Hare. And then it was like midnight by the time everybody got off the plane and they were just stuck. All those passengers with like very little information. It's not an airport that the airline flies to regularly. They didn't really have resources on the ground to help very much other than, they hired the baggage handling folks. And so people got their bags. They all cleared immigration because it's your first port of entry. But then they were all sort of standing outside baggage claim, outside customs saying like, what do we do now? When do we come back? What do we, how do we get to New York eventually?
And I don't remember which airline this was, but one of the airlines actually diverted to Rockford, Illinois, spent 3 hours there, and then had a 30-minute flight down to O'Hare, and then kind of canceled for the night. So things were just kind of ridiculous.
Rockford's O'Hare's main relief valve. And so anytime we get snow in Chicago, it's often, you get a great big United and American parking lot in Rockford. So they're no stranger to diversions. It's just interesting to see them go to Rockford and then hop down to O'Hare and go from there. Airlines prefer to divert to airports where they have ground staff.
Right. I think that explains the Lufthansa flying to Atlanta thing. Someone was questioning me about that earlier. Like, why would they fly 2.5 hours past JFK? Isn't there something else closer? And it was a combination of not really, right? All the closer airports had filled up. But also you needed, at least for LH400, the first flight, it's an A380, so you need an airport that can reasonably handle an A380. We'd already learned that Stewart wasn't that airport from a passenger perspective. Obviously, the runway can handle it just fine. But you need somewhere that can handle that aircraft. Then you look at where Lufthansa has people on the ground, and they have a base at Atlanta. They fly out of there every day. And so it was basically came down to either there or Miami were the options where you could get a 380 gate and it was reasonable to get access.
Go ahead, Jason.
It also comes down to where can you dump your passengers and rely on your other airline partners to figure out the rest. Can you dump them at let's say Chicago if you're a one world carrier and let American handle them the rest of the way is also probably a big determination.
Arguably, if you really needed that, then Lufthansa should have gone to Houston, right? They could have gone yet another hour and a half further, but at least then you've got the United hub there. But I think for the most part, in the way those flights are set up, the people flying in on that were going to JFK. There's very few onward connections at JFK from the Star Alliance carriers domestically because United doesn't fly there anymore. And so, yes, you've got to still get all those people back to New York. United has a decent number of flights from Atlanta up to Newark, or you suck it up, pay the cash, and push them over to Delta.
Yeah, I mean, we get this question a lot. Is when there's any kind of diversion, why didn't the plane just land at the closest airport possible? And you know, Seth, like you mentioned, in this particular instance, that just wasn't possible to do that.
It's, you know, closest is also a relative term, right? The first order of business is land safely, right? Get the plane on the ground at an airport where everybody survives. After that, you know, lots of other things like, can we take off again, come into play? And can we get the passengers off easily? Do we have facilities to refuel? Can we get the bags off? That was a problem in Albany. The 787 that Norwegian dropped in there, they couldn't get the bags off the plane. It's unclear if the 787s and A380 that went to Stewart got the bags off the planes. So
the Norwegian 789 that went to Albany was actually the first 787 of any sort that had gone to Albany, and it's actually on its way back to London Gatwick now with all those bags. So they never got those bags off, and they're flying them all the way back to London to take them back off to put them on another flight to get back to New York. So it's going to be days.
On, you know, the morning flight Saturday morning, and they'll get back around 11 a.m. And then we'll see, you know, how long it takes from there to get them out of JFK out to the passengers that need them.
Yeah. And what comes next, I guess, is the recovery phase of how airlines get all their crap back in order because they have planes not where they're supposed to be. So right now I'm looking at this app. You may have heard of it before, Ian.
I believe the app is called Flight Radar 24.
Yeah, that sounds right.
The title of the channel on which we are broadcasting.
Yeah. So right now,
hopefully people are familiar, but you can go to the app.
Right now, there's an Asiana 777 coming from Chicago, just landed at JFK. Obviously, not something that happens every day. There is a Saudia 777 coming from Toronto, and this was probably the best diversion of the whole day. Was Air Europa went to Bermuda. And they're just repositioning back to JFK now. And right behind them is an Emirates A380 from IAD. So I guess everyone's crew timer reset, and they're all coming back to JFK.
I think that the Air Europa definitely wins the diversion lottery.
Yeah, we're sorry we can't go to blizzard-filled New York. We're going to
take you to Bermuda for the night.
The one hang out at the Princess and sit on the beach for a couple hours. Sorry.
The one thing I did want to talk about, but before we moved on to the how airlines are recovering and things like that, is the 5 or 6 flights that turned around mid-flight.
Yes.
We forgot about that.
Norwegian 7019 was off the southern coast of Greenland and called it quits.
Yeah.
Just turned around and went back to Paris.
Virgin Atlantic A340-600 Ram went all the way back to Casablanca. They were in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. I guess
Lufthansa flight from Frankfurt, I think, also went back.
All went back, so that means some of these flights
744 around late also.
Yeah, so some of these flights were in the air total 10, 11 hours, and they went from origin straight back to their origin.
So Iberia also had their later Madrid flight. The early one ended up in Chicago. On the later flight ended up back in Madrid.
And this comes back to the whole nobody knows when the airport's actually reopening thing. Is they said, okay, 3 o'clock, 8 o'clock, whatever, we'll get there and the airport will be open. But then when the FAA determined, oh no, it's actually going to be 7 a.m., this was probably the craziest but best decision they could have made, was just to go home and try again tomorrow.
Also got to respect that they had enough fuel for that.
Yeah. That's a long way.
You get that fuel.
Flight, you plan for a lot and you get the tailwinds when you turn back around. But
exactly.
You're still in the air for an awful long time for some of those.
Yeah, that's brutal.
I mean, they probably had, a lot of, maybe not a lot, but enough extra fuel because they knew they were at least going to be holding before they landed yesterday.
Yeah. This is remarkable right now. Everyone is coming in back from where they went. So Iberia is coming in from O'Hare. Swiss is coming in from O'Hare. Etihad is coming in from DC. Latam Chile is coming up from Miami. It's just a remarkable number of aircraft that.
What's going to be interesting about that is that's happening on top of like all of we're hitting the evening rush for JFK right now. Also, like there's not going to be gate space for all of these necessarily.
No, gate space at JFK today, especially this evening, has just been an absolute disaster. Let's see if I can do this. If I can.
What do we got for 380 gates in T4? There's not a lot of them, are there?
No, there's only 2 or 3. I think
right?
I'm sharing my screen now, and like,
yeah, which is weird. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. And the amount of aircraft that are just piled up all over the place. Like, I bet this guy's just kind of hanging out there. They landed quite a while ago. All these aircraft that I'm highlighting are all waiting to take off, or I guess some of them are inbound and waiting for a gate. None of these should be here. They're waiting for a gate at Terminal 1, which could take 3-4 hours on a bad day.
The Iberia plane is waiting for somewhere else, isn't it?
Iberia's Terminal 1 airline, so Terminal 7, so they shouldn't even be anywhere near that area of the airport.
Yeah. I mean, that's just how crazy the situation is, though. It's like getting gate space, getting taxiway space, getting around. I'm not even sure. Obviously, the airport's open, but did they manage to actually clear all the taxiways, or just no necessary?
No, some of the taxiways are still closed, and there's some sort of equipment outage that's delaying inbound flights. I don't know. Apparently,
they're replacing the I want to say some of the runway lights on 3-1.
the runway lights at JFK never work, though. That's normal.
I forget which 3-1 though.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, is 3-1 right closed now? I think I saw a NOTAM for that earlier.
Yeah, so still a bad day at JFK is what we're saying.
Yeah, it's getting slowly getting better.
Yep. Oh, that's right. 3-1 right is closed. So on top of all that, they only have one functional runway right now, which is not good. Fun.
Are they not running on the 22s?
No, they're only doing 3-1 left.
Yay.
Which is not great. So basically what happens now is all the airlines, they get all their equipment back to where it's supposed to go, or they just determine that they're going to hit the reset button, send everything back to where it came from, and start over with a fresh schedule the next day. Or a lot of airlines, Delta United specifically, will upgauge flights. So what was normally supposed to be a hub-to-hub 737 today could be a 7.6 or a 7.5, or well, it used to be a 7.4, but
United definitely put a couple of wide bodies from O'Hare to Newark, bringing both passengers and employees. And a buddy of mine was on one of the earliest that came in, and he said it was actually originally going to be an employee ferry flight, and they convinced 4 flight attendants or something to volunteer to work it as a real crew, and so they were able to carry a bunch of extra passengers as well.
Nice.
Well, that's good.
So, every now and then little things go right.
Very little things.
Very, very little things. Yeah.
Well, that's about it.
I mean, it was. I think the most interesting thing of the day is that because of the kind of revolving door of resolution on when the airport was going to be reopened, there were a lot more diversions than we would normally see.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot of those flights would have just been canceled normally.
I don't recall a time where I've ever seen this many diversions from a major airport, especially like JFK, over that extended period of time. It's usually a couple hours here or a couple hours there, but this was pretty much every single flight of a full winter flight schedule inbound for JFK had to go elsewhere. There was one airline in particular who played it smart, or maybe overly cautious. Air France canceled all their flights to JFK and didn't send one. I think they were probably the only airline that did that.
And it worked out well for them.
Yeah.
Except that 380 still isn't at a gate right now.
No, well, no one guaranteed anything about today.
No, and I think it's easy in hindsight to say, God, of course they should have canceled all these flights, right? Like, it was crazy. Why would they keep doing this? But I also don't think anyone ever expected that, even if things kept getting pushed, that all of a sudden, late afternoon, someone would be like, you know what? We need a full overnight to get this thing figured out. I don't think anyone expected there'd be that extra 11-hour gap. Yeah, the forecast degraded pretty quickly too. So I think if Delta was still operating flights here when the airport was closed, everyone's going to get it wrong, because they're usually, as we saw with the hurricane, they're pretty damn good at forecasting what's going to happen when. And that raises an interesting question. I don't know how much time we have, or if you guys have run out of beer yet, but you have this much. Okay, plenty of time. Delta still has its own in-house weather forecasting team, carryover from the Northwest days, if I remember correctly. Yep. Most of the other folks have outsourced that at this point to, the Weather Channel or whoever else does that sort of stuff. I think IBM owns Weather Channel now, maybe. But, there's a lot of different players in that space, but there was some discussion online about dispatch and, is there truly a sort of weather-informed dispatcher helping the pilots to decide, yes, we should go or not, versus the pilot who gets a random, ACARS printout kind of dot matrix. This is what the weather looks like, and it's 3 lines that say it's winds like this, maybe in a couple hours, and they're like, oh well, it says there's going to be windy, but we can still land in that, and just decides to go. And it's obviously hindsight 2020 and all, but there seems to be some question about should all of these flights have gone.
Probably not. And I think
dispatcher have helped, would a different type of dispatch arrangement have helped prevent some of them from flying?
I think it was Phil Durner from NYC Aviation who said that in the U.S. you need to have, at least most airlines have meteorologists on staff. I know United, American, and Delta do, but in Europe and elsewhere, it's just not a requirement, and most just don't have it. So, like you said, it's just basically up to the pilot flying to look at the weather report and say, I want to go elsewhere.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, I mean it is an interesting point of discussion how that operates a bit differently, and whether or not that would have been affected. I think, and one of the big things was the changing, how quickly the forecast changed, and then how JFK decided that they needed to hit the reset button.
Yeah. Let's also be clear. Like, I don't think JFK has ever really done it that way. Right, maybe closed for an hour or two, but never for extended periods like that.
During major like regional blizzards, they'll close for a few hours, but to throw the towel in and say, no, we're done, come back tomorrow, I don't recall that happening in a very long time.
Last time something like that happened.
Yeah, and like I said, it wasn't really the snow; it was the wind. The wind yesterday was just insane.
Yeah, so some of the METARs yesterday were pretty vicious. I mean, there were 46 knot gusts, freezing fog, and blowing snow, plus the snow that was still coming down. I mean, that was one of those things where it wouldn't have been fun either way.
Yeah. Oh, here comes Alitalia from Montreal. Everyone's coming. Good stuff.
It's that time of the day. So now we'll get to talk tomorrow about how well tonight's evening rush went as everybody comes back.
It's not going to go well, and I feel really bad for anyone at the airport.
Well, we'll leave it here then, and we'll wish them luck. Seth, thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Always
Jason,
pleasure.
Thanks for pestering me to do this.
Can do.
We'll do this more often, I think. It's kind of an interlude between our regularly scheduled AvTalk podcasts.
We've had people commenting in the YouTube channel that have completely ignored. Oops. Well, we'll get it right next time.
We'll get it right next time. This is our first foray, and we managed to turn the lights on, so we'll start there and move on for next time. So thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for joining us. We hope you got a little insight into what happens in a giant snowstorm and how airlines deal with that and try to recover. So thanks for sticking around, and we'll talk to you soon. Check out flightradar24.com/blog for the latest episode of AvTalk, all the stuff we post, or you can check us out on Twitter at FlightRadar24, on Facebook the same. Seth is over on Twitter at WANDREME.
No.
M-E?
WANDRME.
Seth corrects me. WANDRME. Jason's on Twitter at Airline Flyer with a Y. I'm on Twitter at Petchmo, PETCHMO. Now you know where to find us, and tell us whether or not you like this, something we should keep doing, or whether or not we should just call it a day and go back to radio.
Man,
so
62 viewers. I hope our podcast is better than that.
The podcast is a little bit better, but it takes a while to get there. All right. Thanks so much for watching. Take care, everyone, and stay out of some blizzards.